Here in the kitchen today, we're going to be making the new apple pie recipe granted to us by the Helltaker expansion that came out for the game Helltaker recently. So right here we have pretty much all of our ingredients that we need. We have our ingredients for the crust, the filling, and the topping. So the first thing we got to do is the crust, and that requires us to separate 3 eggs into egg whites and egg yolks. And the benefit about this recipe is that we are using both parts of that, which is very helpful because one of my least favorite things in the kitchen is when a recipe calls for egg whites or egg yolks, and then you're left with just half of an egg that you have nothing to do with. So to start with, we are taking 2 cups of flour. We have 1/3 of a cup of granulated sugar. And on top of that, we're putting in our 3 egg yolks. One of them got a little messed up, but in the recipe, he also said to maybe use 2 egg yolks. So I figure 2.5, counting for the stuff that's left in the bowl, is a nice compromise. And then it's specified margarine straight out of the fridge. So, here we go. I even measured it ahead of time and put it back in the fridge. And now I need 2 hands to get this out of here, so let's do that. Now I will say I can't eat margarine, so I got the next best thing, which is butter with canola oil in it, which is a spreadable butter. It's the closest thing that I could do. And so now I have to just mix this by hand until it's a dough. So let's see how that goes. So our dough has been made, and I've placed our first layer into my little loaf pan here. And what I'm going to do now is just kind of dock it with a fork a couple of times, because I'm going to then blind bake this for a while. I'm going to just put it in the oven, which has been preheated to 350 Fahrenheit. And I'm going to shove this in the oven for 5 to 10 minutes, just to kind of get this cooked a little bit. Because I noticed in the video of the recipe that he did dock it, but then he didn't bake it first. And I'm not sure if part of that was to have the apple flavor soak in, but the goal generally when you have a bottom crust is you don't want it soggy. So that's my goal here, is to not get that soggy. Our next step is the filling, which means I need to skin, peel, and then slice up or grate 3 Granny Smith apples, because it specified sour apples, and really I don't know what other apples are sour besides Granny Smith. So let's do that next. It is hour 1. We are beginning to grate the apples. So the whole reason I did that joke about day 1 or hour 1 of grating the apples was I kind of was going to make a joke that it was taking forever. As it turns out, it's way easier to just grate apples than it is to slice them. So here we have a few tablespoons of sugar and as much cinnamon as you can stomach, and it recommended half a teaspoon, but I'm putting in a whole teaspoon because, I'm a strong man. So I'm going to mix this up. I'm going to pull the pie crust out of the oven. So we'll see how that goes. Well, I've mixed the apples, and I have started whipping the egg whites. I'm stepping away because I have no idea how loud that's going to sound on my phone's camera. Let's get even closer. Yep, we're getting whipped in. And then we'll add another 1/3 of a cup of sugar. Our apples are here, just soaking up that cinnamon flavor. I'm kind of tempted to add a bit more, because they look kind of pale, but I'm going to leave them as they are, and we'll just see how that goes. You can always make a recipe more than once if you need to. Okay, we have placed the apple filling into the crust. We have a nice cream topping to go on top of that, and then I've pulled the crust out to go on top. And the recipe recommended using a grater to do this, but my filling, my crust, I'm not sure if it's because I couldn't use real margarine, if that had anything to do with it, but it is a lot flakier to begin with, so I'm just going to crumble it over the top like it was an apple crumble or an apple crisp. So we're going to stick this on and then put it in, and we'll show you when it's ready to go inside. And there's our apple pie ready to go into the oven. I'm hoping it's good. The whipped topping, I tried my best not to deflate as I put it into the pan. So we're going to put it in the oven now. The recipe said for 1 hour, but then in the notes he said 1 hour was a little much. So I'm putting it in for 50 minutes, and then we'll see how it looks then. Let's get this bad boy in my dirty, dirty oven. And we are go. Okay, at about 50 minutes is when I just pulled this out of the oven, and it looks really good to me. It didn't deflate at all. In fact, it seems to have risen, which is good. The crust here, I didn't want to get it too dark, and you know, it's not the best light on the phone, but it's a little golden brown around the edges here, and you can still see kind of the meringue poking through. It looks really good. Now, in the recipe, he also topped it with powdered sugar, and initially I assumed that was just because it looked burnt on top. But I think it's also going to be a nice addition anyway, so I'm going to do the same. So I'll be right back with that. Bada bing, bada boom. There's our heavy snowfall. I figured the recipe intentionally didn't have a lot of sugar in it, so I thought adding a bit more on top would be kind of nice. But it's still very, very hot, and I'm going to let this cool for a little bit, and we'll see how it tastes after that. And there she is. I got her out onto a cooling rack and pulled the parchment paper away. I did forget to grease up the parchment paper, but thankfully it seems to have done okay with at least pulling away from the sides. We didn't lose much there. And it's a very interesting looking dessert. I do want to start getting into it. It looks very crumbly and it's going to get messy, so let's take a look. And there it is. It's pretty cool looking. We have our layer of crust at the bottom here, and we have some apples at the top, and here's like the meringue, and then, or I guess that's what it was, that egg white, and then our crust on top. So it is definitely a very loose structure because of the meringue and the crumb on top. But let's see if I can get a decent bite out of this. Oh, I totally missed that angle, but here we go. Ooh, look at that. Let me get the angle. Come on, there we go. It's interesting. The meringue gets kind of lost with everything else, and I'm pretty sure I made my bottom crust way too thick. Yeah, I think that's way too thick. You'll probably want to go shorter. This would be good for like a millionaire's shortbread, but I think the goal would have been a smaller crust and probably more apples. I used 3. You might want to use 4 or 5. It is still tasty, but it's not better than a regular apple pie by any means. Yeah, that's my verdict. If you do a shorter bottom crust and maybe more apples on top, it would be as good as an apple pie. It's still tasty, and it's not too sweet. This would be, maybe not because of the powdered sugar, but without the powdered sugar, This would probably be a nice breakfasty dessert item. You know how some people might have a cake for breakfast. I could see this working with that. As it is now, I would give it like a 3 out of 5, maybe a 2.5. But if you did the ratio better, it'd probably be up there with a 4.5. Yeah, but that was the Helltaker apple pie.